Hi, folks. This is Don Meissner with the North Country Fishing Report. I thought maybe it'd be a nice thing if I could share some of my favorite lures with all you folks, because there's certain lures that have become my go-to, but they become my go-to because I use a lot of different things, and certain things tend to work better for me most of the time. So I'm gonna share some of those things with you. On another report, I talked about the fluke, and the fluke is something fantastic for not just bass, not just smallmouth or largemouth, but also can work well for walleyes and northern pike and muskies. So that it isn't my number one favorite, but it's a favorite. Other lures that I use now are soft plastics in very small sizes. Soft plastic baits. Z-Man is one. If you only go to one company, if you get any of the little tiny baits that Z-Man makes, they're shaped like either crayfish or salamanders, or they have ones called a bug Z that's not shaped like anything, but fish seem to think it's a bug. These are some of my very favorites. When I go out in the summer and fish for smallmouth bass in our rivers, all I need to take is a couple of these, a couple varieties of these soft plastic baits, and you can catch everything from the smallest smallmouth to real giant ones, but also almost every time I'm catching a muskie, feeding on these little baits. So if you want to go fishing any of those places, if you get something that looks like a crayfish, a salamander, or a hellgrammite. And I've talked to you about hellgrammites, but it's like almost, if you've never seen one, it's like a centipede with all kinds of legs, pinchers in the front of it, and fish go crazy for it. Anything that resembles the shape of something that floats down the river that lives in the area that those fish live, whether it's a grasshopper or a frog that happens to get in the water, they love those. Anything like that. These are favorite baits for me. And now that I've spent the good part of this year, this fishing season, fishing for trout, I can tell you that I've discovered a couple little baits that they've allowed me to catch trout in a way and in numbers that I never thought were possible in this area. And that is, and I'll give you the very names of these baits as well. One of them is it's made by Leland Lures, and it's called a trout magnet. And what it is, if you looked at it, you'd say, fish aren't going to hit this. It's a little lead or tungsten head. Now we're talking tiny now. We're talking 1/32 and 1/64 of an ounce. But that lure is incredible. It's absolutely incredible. And I've caught some of my biggest trout on that. Then another lure that is fantastic, made by Berkeley, it's called an atomic teaser. And they also have just an atomic tube. But these, again, are little tiny baits. You wouldn't think a trout will hit because they look like a tube jig that we use for bass, only they're tiny. But yet it really, really makes a difference. So these have become my favorite lures. The Z-Man, little soft plastics for bass that are shaped like natural things, hellgrammites, salamanders, or crayfish, or the two little trout baits I've told you about. In fact, over the last week, and it's getting late now for catching good trout because the water's warming up and it's just not as good fishing as it is in the late spring. But anyway, I caught the biggest trout I've caught in streams like this since I was a little kid, and my picture was in the paper for catching a 23-inch brown trout. I caught one that was just about 20 inches a few days ago. It blew my mind that it was that big, that it was in our water, and I was using something so tiny. It was a 1/64 ounce tungsten jig head and a tiny little spike of a worm. I mean, so small, maybe 3/4 of an inch long. The whole bait was tiny. And I thought when I threw it out, no big trout's going to hit this. Maybe I'll catch little bitty ones. No, I catch the biggest trout I've caught in years. And it just shows, how incredibly important it is to know your species that you're fishing for and know the type of things that they would want to eat. Until next time, folks, this is Don Meissner with the North Country Fishing Report.